Hi, welcome to Audiobook Academy. This is a self-paced audiobook. There's no need to keep an eye on things. Just pay attention. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Book summary of Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed. Matthew Syed's Black Box Thinking is an example of creative problem solving. We can only achieve success if we are willing to face our mistakes. More people die as a result of errors made by doctors and hospitals than as a result of car accidents. When it comes to aviation, on the other hand, the safety record is astoundingly good because mistakes are learned from rather than concealed. The failure to learn from mistakes is the single most significant impediment to progress. Having a positive attitude toward failure is essential for achieving success. The only way to unleash progress, creativity, and resilience is to rethink what it means to be a failure. When confronted with evidence that calls into question our deeply held beliefs, we are more likely to reframe the evidence than we are to change our beliefs, says the researcher. Making marginal gains does not imply making minor adjustments and hoping for the best. Instead, it is about breaking down a large problem into smaller parts in order to determine what works and what doesn't. Furthermore, black box thinking is about the willingness and tenacity to investigate the lessons that often exist when we fail, but which we rarely exploit. Furthermore, black box thinking is about creating systems and cultures that enable organizations to learn from errors, rather than being threatened by them, according to Syed. Failure to learn from mistakes has proven to be one of the most significant impediments to human progress throughout history. A progressive attitude toward failure turns out to be a cornerstone of success for any organization, says the author of the book. In general, society's attitude toward failure is incredibly conflicted. Even as we make excuses for our own shortcomings, we are quick to point the finger at others who make mistakes. It is partly because we are so willing to hold others accountable for their mistakes that we are so anxious to keep our own mistakes hidden. How people will react and point the finger is predicted with remarkable clarity, as is how little time it will take them to put themselves in the difficult, high-pressure situation in which the mistake occurred. The net result is straightforward: it obliterates openness and encourages cover-ups. It obliterates the critical information we require in order to learn. The only way to unleash progress, creativity, and resilience is to rethink what it means to be a failure. So, to reiterate, for our purposes, a closed loop is one in which failure does not result in progress because information about errors and weaknesses is misinterpreted or ignored. An open loop, on the other hand, results in progress because feedback is rationally acted upon. In each case, the investigators came to the conclusion that the crews were losing their sense of time. It turns out that attention is a limited resource. If you concentrate on one thing for too long, you will lose awareness of other things. The problem was not a lack of effort or motivation, but rather a system that was insensitive to the limitations of human psychology, says the author. When people don't question their mistakes, they may not even be aware that they have made one, even if they have a strong suspicion that they have. The PACE, probe, alert, challenge, and emergency mnemonic has been used to improve the assertiveness of junior members of the crew in the aviation industry. Black box thinking is about establishing systems and cultures that allow organizations to learn from mistakes rather than being threatened by them, according to the authors. Essentially, practice is about maximizing the benefits of failure while simultaneously minimizing the costs of failure. It is preferable to fail in practice in order to better prepare for the big stage than to fail on the big stage itself. Similarly, organizations that use pilot schemes, and, in the case of aviation and other safety-critical industries, test ideas in simulators, to learn before implementing new ideas or procedures should consider doing the same. The more we fail in practice, the more we learn, and the more we learn, the more likely it is that we will succeed when it matters most. The evidence that challenges our deeply held beliefs makes us more likely to reframe the evidence rather than change our beliefs, according to the research. We simply invent new reasons, new justifications, and new explanations to support our positions. There are times when we completely disregard the evidence. Cognitive dissonance occurs when mistakes are deemed too dangerous to admit, and as a result, they are reframed or ignored. This can be thought of as the internal fear of failure, the difficulty we have in admitting our own mistakes. As he puts it, the problem we have today is that we are operating under the assumption that we will be successful. The concept is that, once a target has been identified, for example, creating a new website, designing a new product, or improving a political outcome, you come up with a really clever strategy designed to hit the target. Professor Lane recommends a completely different concept of success, the guided missile approach, writes the New York Times in 2008. Success is not only dependent on prior-to-event reasoning, It is also dependent on after-trigger adaptation, says the author. In the absence of data, narrative is the most effective tool we have at our disposal. Making marginal gains does not imply making minor adjustments and hoping for the best. Instead, it is about breaking down a large problem into smaller parts in order to determine what works and what doesn't. In many ways, creativity is a response to adversity. In order to realize our full potential as individuals and as organizations, we must redefine failure. Here are 3 lessons to be learned from failure. 1. We despise admitting our mistakes almost as much as we despise making them. 2. By treating your ideas as hypotheses, you can look for evidence that contradicts them. 3. Create a positive relationship with failure so that you can stop avoiding it in the future. Lesson 1. The only thing we despise more than making mistakes is having to admit that we've done so. What could be more frustrating than forgetting to send your monthly status report to your most important client? You'll have to come in the next day and confess your mistake to your boss. Even though the culture of entrepreneurship is trying everything it can to convince you otherwise, failure is never cool when it occurs. Having a failed startup has almost become a badge of honor, but what it really means is that you let too much small failures accumulate, until you eventually had to suck up a huge one, that your company's not working. Imagine having to inform your investor that you have just incurred a $3 million loss. This shouldn't make for a pleasant day. While it is still the goal to avoid failure on a grand scale, this can only be accomplished by admitting as many small mistakes as you are capable of admitting. Lesson 2. Treat all of your ideas as hypotheses so that you can search for evidence that contradicts them. So, what can you do to make it easier for yourself to admit your mistakes? Consider treating all of your ideas and conclusions as hypotheses, which is one way to go about it. Because the world is a frightening and complicated place, we have a natural tendency to oversimplify things. In the event that we thought about every problem in our lives all of the time, we would most likely become paralyzed and unable to take any action. It is through simplifying that we are able to survive and navigate our way through life. However, there are times when it does not work. Instead of assuming that what you already know is a given fact, look for evidence that contradicts your assumptions so that you can improve your hypotheses over time. Lesson 3. Transform your negative relationship with failure into a positive one so that you will no longer avoid it. If being successful means being able to live with and learn from failure, then having a positive relationship with mistakes is a precondition for achieving success. If being successful means being able to live with and learn from failure, then having a positive relationship with mistakes is a precondition for achieving success. It's the difference between having a fixed mindset and having a growth mindset, with only one of them allowing you to accept mistakes, admit them, and then take responsibility for them in order to change them. For example, I'm sure there were a bunch of cool kids when you were in school who never studied before a test, and maybe even went out to party the night before. This type of person is usually so concerned about falling short of expectations that they purposefully sabotage themselves in advance of those expectations. If they do well on the test, everything will be fine, but if they don't, they can at least blame their poor performance on the partying. That's a loser's mentality, and you're well aware of it. So, whenever possible, try to see failure in a more positive light and accept responsibility for your actions. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Please don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. See you in next audiobook.